Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Leitner with the Smithsonian Institution. I'm an instructional designer here. Welcome to Easy Peasy with the Smithsonian. We're excited to have you joining us again. I'm here with my colleague, Ashley Naranjo, also from the Smithsonian, as well as Jim Reese from the Washington International School and Ellen Rogers from Belvedere Elementary. So today we're going to continue in our series of modeling routines from Harvard's Project Zero. These are often done in person, but we're trying to show you some ways that you can consider doing these online with your students as well. We will go ahead, we'll model the routine, and then at the end, we'll take some general questions that you have. In the spirit of modeling, we'll start with our SEL opener, our socio-emotional learning opener. So we wanted to ask you today to use the chat and type in something you are optimistic about. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Ellen and Ashley.
All right. I'm going to jump in here. Hi, everybody. It's Jim Reese, and we're thrilled to have you here. Happy Earth Day to everyone. And it's a beautiful day outside here in Washington, D.C. If you have a chance to get outside, please do for Earth Day. It's a pleasure to have Ellen here with us again today. We were together on Monday. And we're going to repeat the routine that we did on Monday, but we're going to do it with different objects. I just first want to say a little bit about the work that I do and then how it involves Ellen, because it'll make a nice transition to what she's going to present today. So I run a Center for Professional Development at Washington International School that serves not only the educators at our school, which we call WIS, but it also serves educators across the region. And we've had this really wonderful partnership with the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access that Ashley works with for the past 3 years. And through that relationship, we had a project last year that was called Museums Go Global. And with that project, we were aiming to use the Learning Lab and the resources in the Learning Lab and thinking routines from Project Zero, specifically global thinking routines, to help teachers educate for global competence with museum resources. And Ellen was a vital part of that project. We had 8 teachers from a variety of different schools in the area who took part. And they developed 2 collections over the course of the year through seminars that we were holding once a month. And so it was a really wonderful project. We're really proud of the work they've done. And Ellen will be showing off then the one of the collections that she created last year, and that will be the subject of what we're looking at today. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ellen.
Well, thank you, Jim. This collection was a lot of fun to make and definitely was in the spirit. Belvedere is a PYP school, and so global competency is really important as an IB school. So it worked very well for the students that I was teaching. Specifically, this lesson or this collection we used with the 3rd graders. So I'll talk a bit about that at the end, about what that was like with live students. Do we need to introduce Ashley before we begin?
I'd be happy to just jump in for just a second. My name is Ashley Naranjo, and I work with the Smithsonian Learning Lab at the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access in Washington, D.C. And I'm so delighted to have Ellen Rogers facilitate today's session. On the screen, as we go through this process, I'll be doing some screen shares to show what this looks like in a distance learning environment. We'll do some zooming in, some close looking. And then at the end of the session, we'll also share the resources that we've used in today's session with you too. So those are also available and will be archived with this session as well. So looking forward to seeing all of the comments in the chat, and let's get started.
Okay, sounds great. So we're going to start with the routine. If you were with us on Monday, you'll know the routine, but if not, that's all right. So today's routine is going to be a See, Wonder, Connect. And with this routine, we're actually going to do a bit in the beginning where we're not going to share anything. We're going to do some just internally, just do some noticing with the individual items, because we're going to look at 3. And then we'll come together when all 3 are shown. We'll go through the entire See, Wonder, Connect experience. So let's take a look at our first item. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just kind of make sure that your eyes go all the way across the artwork. Make sure that you're looking at both the foreground, so at the front of the painting, or for your purposes, the bottom. Taking in and noticing details, color, lines, and shapes. And then moving our way up, you might notice more colors, shapes, lines. There's letters too as well in this particular painting. And so as we're going, we might notice that particular parts might be familiar and some might not. But as we go, we're really focusing on just the details. Once we've acknowledged what we think something is, we can really still focus in on both the choice that the artist made about color, the lines, but also specific details that were painted. So now that we've really had a chance to look, we are going to move on to the next one, just mostly because we are going to come back and do a See Wonder Connect with all three pieces, but I want us to get a chance to look at each one up close. So we'll move to the next one. In the next item, we'll take a look at the overall photograph. We might notice both the shape and color. And then as we move a bit closer, we might try to notice texture. We might be able to see a bit more detail in the photograph. So now that we've had a chance to kind of look closely, recognizing that this is an item we might know, we're going to move to our last item in the collection that we're looking at today. And then this last one, we're going to take in the overall painting to start. Noticing, once again, lines, color, also the shapes that are made. And then we can start just as we've done before and start in the foreground, starting at the bottom of the painting, of really looking at what's there in a more close detail, noticing things as we zoom in that we couldn't see before in the overall, and possibly confirming some things that we knew we saw from overall. And we'll move to the background, noticing, once again, the lines, the shapes, the colors, and then the added detail as we zoom in. So now that we've had a chance to look at all three of these up close, we're going to take a look at the three together and start talking about some things that we saw. And we could either write this as a list, or we can, for our purposes today, we're going to just kind of say them out loud. So you can actually type them in the chat if you'd like. And I'm going to ask Jim to share some things that he noticed as we start. So Jim, do you mind sharing maybe one or two items that you saw, something that you saw that you think is worth sharing?
Sure. So in thinking about each one individually, I noticed in the first one that it looks to me like, I see a lot of different varieties of birds. And I know they're birds because of I see wings, I see some in the air flying, and just the way, but I don't recognize necessarily the kinds of birds they are. But I see that I see a lot of dark colors, except for that flaming red, and every once in a while a shading of light, but a lot of dark colors in it. And what looks to me like maybe an oil paint. It feels really rich. The colors feel really rich, and it looks kind of slick. The surface seems kind of slick. So I was thinking about oil paint. And that second one we looked at, I mean, it was clearly a hat to me. It looks like a top hat. But what seemed different to me in that the texture seemed different from what I would imagine a top hat looking like in my own experience. And I've never had one, but just having seen them in movies and pictures, that kind of thing. I noticed a few similar patterns with the fabric that goes around the base of it and then around the rim, that the pattern seems similar with these lines, diagonal lines. And I don't know if it created a texture or not, but I saw these lines. And in that third one, again, it looks like a painting. It's clearly a stamp. We see the USA 39 on there, and I saw 2006 in the lower left-hand corner. I see an eagle. I see a beautiful landscape that the eagle is flying over. The eagle is in mid-flight, and so and the eagle is flying in the direction off the the painting. So it's interesting for the eyes that my eyes were heading off the painting as the eagle was flying. So I was looking in that direction. And interesting, if you look above I'm sort of getting into compare, but if you look above, that central bird is looking off in that same direction. So it's almost as if our eyes are being pushed to the left of the painting.
Yeah, absolutely. We see there's some interesting, what you see, I'm now starting to notice direction as well, like the directionality of where the animals are facing, but also even the hat, the direction it's facing. So it's kind of interesting. You saying that made me think or notice that.
Right, like even if there were a head that the hat were on, then that face would be facing off sort of to the left as well. So there is that kind of directionality in all three.
It seems interesting because it seems like some people in the chat are noticing the contrast of light and dark, which was interesting because I didn't actually necessarily point that out, but lots of people are noticing that contrast in, it seems like in all three.
Right. Yeah, there's some things I'm noticing in the comment section too. Amy was noticing, for example, bright flowers and dark sky in the background, and Ashley was showing that noticing that the first and third images include both flora and fauna. Yep.
So
there's been some people have also noticed there's a lot of texture to the hat. Tess was noticing texture, and Vicky was wondering if the hat was beaver skin. So we see animals in the other one, but maybe there's some animal connection to the hat as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually wonderful because Vicky can kind of move us a bit into the wondering. With this idea of what are some things we might be wondering. It could be about a particular image, or it can be about all three. But so Vicky launches us into the first one, which is she's wondering about specifically the hat, whether it's made of beaver skin.
You know, one thing when I'm looking at the hat too, I'm wondering if it was a hat that was actually worn. It doesn't, the surface of it doesn't look that worn. And certainly rims often are the first things I think that go on a hat like this. And it doesn't look that worn. So it makes me wonder, was this made for a special occasion, or was it made to be worn? And if so, was it worn much? I'm just wondering the source of it.
It's a great wondering.
Vicky's also wondering if they're endangered or extinct animal connections among them. And
I would pose to Vicky and to anyone else, it could be Vicky or other people that want to respond to her. I wonder what makes her say that.
Okay.
I wonder what makes her curious about endangered and extinct animals in reference to these three images.
So I think she said she's noticing that the top one has the words dodo, so that might be calling on some background knowledge that she already has.
Mene8471 is wondering about the audience. So what did the creator want to elicit in the audience, especially maybe in those two drawings? Was there something that the creator of the painting or the piece was trying to get out of an audience, or some kind of emotion or something like that?
Tess is wondering about the bright flowers on the bottom and if they were chosen, why they were chosen to include alongside a bald eagle. And Cheryl's wondering if the images on the stamp are separate images and not necessarily a whole setting recreation.
Interesting.
And I'm wondering about the birds that are congregating in the top picture. Are those birds that would have normally been in the same habitat, or are they put together in an artificial way for the purposes of what the creator is trying to do?
So it sounds like there's a sense of wondering about, and for lack of a better word, authenticity in both the first and third image, about this idea of, is this a kind of a crafted thing, or was it more natural in its appearance? So that's a really interesting wondering.
Yeah, and both Abby and Cheryl are kind of continuing this conversation about that, whereas Abby's wondering the same thing that Cheryl was about, are these images in the bottom in the stamp picture, are they naturally together, or has the artist contrived them? It's sort of, Abby says it sort of looks photoshopped to her. And then Cheryl was wondering, because some of those flowers in the foreground look like orchids, and we don't necessarily associate the habitat of an eagle with the habitat for an orchid, I'm guessing. Amy's wondering who the hat belonged to.
Jamie's wondering, back to the eagle, is why such a prominent eagle and why on a stamp? instead of just an image.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think it's interesting because as people bring this up, we can also think about perhaps the symbols that these might represent. We can wonder about that a bit, about especially because people have said this is an eagle, it's a stamp, so we can wonder a bit about, so what is why would this be symbolic, and what is it a symbol of exactly?
And Veronica had just posted that she wonders whether the eagle is meant as a national symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And if we take that in turn, then that really makes me wonder about the first painting and what does that symbolism mean, and what are we supposed to be thinking about that? And then left with the hat on top of everything.
Right. I mean, the top hat has a symbolic meaning, I think, in our culture of elegance, of a fancy event. You'd wear a top hat to a fancy event. There was a time in history when it was expected that when men went to out in public that they would wear hats. There was a time for women too when they were meant to wear hats, and so for me it conjures up formality, public, and so forth. So it has a symbolic resonance as well.
And I think age too, and I know that Vicky had noted that too. She said the first image is a style very much like early or late 1700s, early 1800s style painting, and then the hat calls up a different time too. So something about age and time period.
Phil noted that the hat shown in Limbo is jarring to his eye compared to the other images. It is the human-created object which is significant. Interesting contrast there. We're moving into sort of comparing and contrasting there, but it's sort of the odd one out. If we were thinking about these three images as which one doesn't fit, he's saying the hat doesn't fit because it's a human-made object, whereas the other two, even though the images are human-made, they're depicting natural scenes.
And I think we can shift, since it is a natural shift that Phil's leading us this way. And this is what I would do with both students in person or online, is to, once Phil kind of directs us towards the connect and compare, it's a perfect time to go ahead and do so. So
Jamie follows that along. She I think also is moving in that direction. She's wondering about the connection to the patriotic imagery, the gentility of the top hat, and juxtaposed with the sort of shameful circumstance of endangered species.
Yeah, and that makes me, I guess my follow-up to Jamie and everyone is to really wonder, so how can we either connect these things or compare those three statements she's made about these three images? Right. Is it that they are opposites only, or is there some sort of connection between them?
Veronica's noting that the hat, seeing the comment about the hat, makes her wonder about the relationship between civilization in quotation marks and nature. So is that the purpose for the sort of the curating of these three items together? And other stuff, I know either stuff's identity, but I won't reveal it here. Other stuff says all of them are different types of art: painting, stamp, and clothing. So showing a different, in a sense, medium in which each lives. So showing that kind of contrast. Even though that we're starting to see some connection, maybe around endangered species.
And so we can kind of embrace this idea of things that maybe one or two items are connected, but maybe not all three. And then maybe ways that all three are either connected or different. And that might help us get to some meaning and some deeper understanding.
Manny, 8417 suggested this is the very context informs the meaning. So juxtaposing these images by nature forms a relationship between them. So they're all sitting together. Amy says, I think the direction of the objects we talked about is interesting. It seems like the direction is going backward instead of forward. Stephanie says the dodo is a symbol of extinction or obsolescence. Jamie suggests maybe each piece carries that tension between ideas of civilization and our mistreatment of a natural resource.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I love how there's a real conversation that's going on where people are building off of each other's ideas.
Absolutely. So we've had some really interesting themes. Even when we were doing this C, it was really interesting to have people talking about the contrast of light and dark, about textures, even about whether it was a staged painting or whether it was a natural, a more natural setting. But now we've really moved into themes about both humanity and nature, and about both mistreatment, but also beauty. So it's interesting to see everyone's contrast.
Yeah, and Ashley posted the hat, just going on that the hat shows how humans have used animals for their own prominence, whereas the stamp might commemorate or remind us to take better care of animals. And Cheryl's now really wondering if the hat has made of some kind of extinct animal.
Well, and that kind of, Cheryl's question really kind of moves us a bit into a kind of an interesting question, especially for this particular collection, is this question of why are these three things together? You have some ideas, some things that you're thinking, but these three pieces were curated together with a purpose in mind. And so it is interesting to then create a connection or a comparison across to try to get to that. So we've had some really, I would say, pretty broad conceptual ideas about why these three might be connected.
I think this conversation is continuing with Cheryl and Veronica. Veronica, too, is thinking about the extraordinary orientation toward nature. Extractionary nature, orientation toward nature. And Stephanie's saying that the hat was worn by, if the hat was worn by Abraham Lincoln, for example, then all the images convey a sense of loss. And again, we often associate Abraham Lincoln in certain images we have of him with a top hat.
Absolutely. So we could really continue going, but for our purposes today, I'm going to kind of close this only because I want to be able to talk a bit about, as the person who actually put these three images together, I want to talk a bit about the motivation behind it, and also talk about where this actually went as a collection when I was doing the Museum Goes Global experience with Jim. So these three pieces are part of a larger collection about conservation that I did in tandem with Jim for Museums Go Global, the Smithsonian Learning Lab. And it was wonderful because Jim was able to connect us with museum curators. And I had the privilege of being able to work with the Smithsonian Zoo. And so they had talked to me a bit about this idea of conservation and really focusing on North American animals because they have had a large resurgence in conservation. And so my overall collection includes lots of animals. One of them is the American bald eagle and the beaver, which are both the two items, both the beaver hat and then the American bald eagle stamp. They both have an interesting story about their near extinction and then their conservation moving forward, and the tension that remains between humans and animals. And so even though both the bald eagle and beavers have had a resurgence, there's also some conflict now about water protection and things moving forward that can actually put these animals that we've done a great job conserving to risk. So it was really an interesting chance to talk to them. And then when I post this with students, what I asked them to do is to then think about, I'm in Fairfax County, so we looked at the state of Virginia's endangered animals, and the kids considered what actions humans could take to help the conservation of those animals. And so the students asked the kids at school to do some things to change their lifestyle choices to better ensure that those animals in Virginia would be protected. So that's kind of where that ended up. They made some posters and took some action, and it was pretty interesting. But I think it's still something that people could do at home with the same collection, do it at home with their students or their kids. So I don't know if at this point, if people want to take their participant hats off and maybe either post some questions or some ideas about how this collection could move forward. Or Jim, if you want to add anything.
Sure. I'm just going to invite Ashley to come back on and take us through that collection, which lives in the Learning Lab. This one lives certainly under Easy Peasy, but the original collection is in here too, and it's we have a hashtag in the Learning Lab called #GoGlobal. So if anybody wants to find the 20 collections that we've uploaded or created in the Learning Lab with that project, you're welcome to do it, and you'll see a lot of the global thinking routines as well that are attached to the images in those collections. But the teachers did fantastic work, and so I really want to commend them, and including Ellen, for really pushing our thinking overall in terms of how we educate for global competence in a powerful way using museum resources. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley.
Sure, absolutely. So in addition to this 30-minute session being archived, I also wanted to share that each session comes with kind of a complimentary Smithsonian Learning Lab collection. And so as we look at this collection, we can see each one has a title and short description. And then there's also the specific routine that's in place. So here you can see Wonder Connect and the questions that follow. You can also click on the I button to get more information and a short description of how this routine can be launched. And then as we go through, you can see each of the different images that were included in this collection. We chose to kind of hide the original titles of these resources. So you can see here it says, look closely at the artwork. And what we've done is hidden the titles into the description here, where you can find more information about the specific artworks or objects and the museum itself. Here I've included them as kind of 3 images together to bring our thinking together. And then we also have some Project Zero thinking routine context for us. So a video that you can watch if you're interested in learning more about thinking routines in Project Zero, as well as additional information about this specific routine. There are also a few lessons that we've included, including the lesson that Jim and Ellen were just talking about from the Go Global cohort. So the first one is a collection that was curated by Ellen. And then the second one was another collection that was curated by a fellow local DC teacher around environmental advocacy through art. At the end of this collection, you'll also see that the webinar is archived, so you have access to it. You can share it with a friend. You can rewind and fast forward to all your favorite parts. Do this at the family dinner table tonight if you're looking for some conversation. And then there's also Harvard's Graduate School of Education, their online courses related to Project Zero thinking routines too. So all of this has been archived and available for you. It's linked in the description. I believe Allison also linked it in the chat for us as well.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. Deb was wondering, Ellen, if you could repeat the questions you asked the students as you walked them through the routine.
For See Wonder Connect. Mm-hmm. So I actually didn't. I didn't actually do See Wonder Connect specifically with the routine with my students. We actually did. I saw some people talking about co-collaboration. So what we actually did is I presented this idea of conservation, and we actually did a bit of a mind map about this idea of what does conservation mean, what are the things that they know that are related to it. And then I actually opened up my collection and had them select which animal they wanted to learn a little bit more about. And so we started with doing just a See Wonder Connect with one image. So if they picked the American bald eagle, then I would pick that stamp to show, and then they did some See Wonder Connect with that, and connecting the idea of conservation. And then we learned more about how the animal was both endangered and then had a wonderful success story. I mean, part of this had to do with this idea. I had shared with the Smithsonian Zoo this idea that a lot of times third graders get very into endangered animals, and it becomes a very sad story about how all animals are going to die and that there's nothing that we can do. And so I wanted a little bit of a more optimistic view about how we can help animals. And so the Smithsonian Zoo directed me to this idea of highlighting conservation efforts that the United States has made and success stories that the kids might really be interested in. And so that's how we then went from learning about a particular, and they actually picked the bald eagle as one of their topics when we looked at it. I then asked them, well, I wonder if there's endangered animals in Virginia. And so in the collection that's shared here, there is a link to the U.S. Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, which actually has a list of every state's endangered animals. And so they went to Virginia and learned a bit about it, and then decided to take their action from there. So I did say, well, how can we share what we've learned? And so hopefully that helps a little bit. But I will say the actual collections from the Smithsonian have it, as Ashley showed you, if you press the info button, it does kind of help you with additional questions to ask beyond just what do you see. It gives you some additional questions you can ask. So hopefully that answers that question.
And Stephanie has a comment that she'd be interested to ask students to add a fourth image that supports whatever connection they see.
I really love that idea. And there's also this idea of you could actually have the kids do this part at the end. So you've learned about a bunch of animals that have had conservation efforts. What three would really tell a great story? What images would really communicate? It would be really interesting to have kids be a part of that.
It seems so fitting on Earth Day that we have a collection that leads to student action and students feeling as if they can make a difference in the conservation of the earth, of animals, and helping restore them to their natural habitats and to help them flourish in the world we live in. So thanks. I'm going to let Allison close us out and tell us about some things that are happening in the Smithsonian-wide about Earth Day.
Yeah, so the Smithsonian is actively engaging in Earth Day in this digital sense. So I'm just putting a link in the chat now. The SmithsonianMag.com worked across the institution to talk with our curators and scientists and experts to think about 50 things we've learned about the Earth since Earth Day began 50 years ago. And then starting this evening is our virtual Earth Optimism tour, summit. So this was going to be in person, but they're taking it online, and you can watch it live on the website, which I'm going to put up right at the bottom of the screen for you now, earthoptimism.si.edu. This link here has to the calendar, which is what Ashley's showing. And their guests, Jose Andres is coming on tomorrow to talk about food. There are other people who are coming on and going to talk about their different levels of expertise, but the whole summit is about what's going well in conservation, which is why it's the Earth Optimism Summit. So we hope you can, it's free, so please go online and check out whichever parts of the summit are interesting to you. There's also a film festival happening. There's some deep dives. It's a really interesting event, and there's also a lot of coverage on SmithsonianMag.com focusing on Earth Day. So we hope to see you there. We hope you came in thinking about something you're optimistic about. We hope you're also optimistic about conservation and can take that with you and maybe find some action to keep the momentum going. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. We will see you again Monday at 1 p.m. Thank you. Bye.